Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. It's a great honor and privilege to welcome back our mentor and guide and friend, Milton Allimadi. He's the founder and publisher of Black Star News. He's an adjunct history instructor at John Jay College, history professor at John Jay College, and a frequent guest on all sorts of outlets, including our own, which is what I'm most concerned about.
Yes.
Milton, thank you so much for being back.
My pleasure. We love shows that have substance. And this is one of the few shows that got substance.
Honored. Honored.
Yeah, I'm honored, brother.
We're honored by having you and how much we learned from you. We've learned so much. There are some new people on the journey with us since the last time you were on, which has been way too long.
Mm-hmm.
We're never going to let it be that long again.
Right.
But can you just remind everybody of what Black Star News is,
okay,
where you're coming from, and your view of the world?
Okay, very good. Black Star News. Actually, I founded Black Star News after I'd worked in a paper called The City Sun, which is very well known in Brooklyn. It was owned by this elderly African-American brother, Andy Cooper. And I picked it up one day when I was a freelance reporter for the New York Times, covering Metro News. I said, what a paper, doing investigative journalism, doing analysis from a Pan-African, Afrocentric perspective. The kind of stuff that had a lot of substance, but you would not even see in the New York Times, you would not see in the Daily News, you wouldn't see anywhere. Some of the stuff you might see in The Guardian. I like The Guardian, by the way. So then I called him up, I said, listen, I want to work with you. He said, how much are they paying you at the Times? And I told him, he said, I can pay you a quarter of what you're making. And I said, sometimes it's not only about, the money, especially in journalism, right? So I stopped doing the stringing for the New York Times and I went to the City Sun. And that was some of the best journalism that I experienced, analyzing trends in Africa and then covering domestic news right here in New York City from in African-American communities. When I was doing Metro News, the only assignments I did were crime stories. And I said, there's more than crime going on in these neighborhoods, right? So that's why I appreciated the City Sun. And then when the publisher had a stroke, he couldn't continue the paper, I drew up a business plan and I started sending it out to folks that I knew had deep pockets. And you'll be surprised to hear the only person that sent me a check, Camille and Bill Cosby.
Oh man!
And that's how I started Black Star
Human
News.
life is complicated.
That's how I started Black
and
Star
that, what
News.
year was that? 1990?
1998, 97, 98.
97, 98.
And
so you're starting as a physical newspaper.
I started as a physical newspaper, and then of course the internet became a big thing, and we were able to start breaking news. That I remember we did a story on some scandal on a Wall Street firm. At that time it was called Morgan Stanley Dean Witter. It's Morgan Stanley now. I won't go to the whole history of the story, but anyway, all the papers had to quote what we were reporting in the Black Star News.
Yeah.
We broke that story. The New York Times had to, come back to us. The Wall Street Journal gave us a good write-up. And that's when we started really getting people now contacting us with serious news. So I think the hard work we put in helped us establish ourselves. But as you know, if you're not properly capitalized, you're always behind the curve. And, we've been decades behind the curve because we were never capitalized. We're just living on the news generating the attention, and that bringing in some revenue to keep us going along.
What's the worldview that drives you and Black Star News?
The worldview is that we should not cede control of the world to capital, monopoly capital, whether here in the United States or whether in Africa. And here, the capacity to resist is much more developed than in most African countries, where the dominance is overwhelming. It's no difference. People who watch that film by Raoul Peck, Lumumba, that the Belgian general, Janssens, Emile Janssens, before he was fired by Patrice Lumumba, he told the Congolese troops, he said, He wrote it on a blackboard, and this has actually happened, you know, in real life. That was reproduced in the film by Peck. After independence equals before independence. And that's the situation that applies tragically in most African countries. The colonial state that was established in 1884 at the in Berlin Conference in Germany, where the European powers of the day partitioned Africa, primarily the French, the British, Portuguese, and Belgians got the largest chunk, but other countries as well, Germany, Italy, Spain. And Africa was turned into a plantation, providers of cheap to slave labor, providers of raw materials, and consumers of manufactured products from Europe. That was 1884. 1884 exists today in 2019. Europe exports about 80% of manufactured products. In other words, products that are manufactured, exported to Africa from Europe, 80% manufactures, and imports about 80% of raw materials. So you cannot change, you cannot uplift the quality of life if you still have a colonial regime applying to Africa's economies. So when people talk about independence for Africa countries in the 1960s, it was nominal independence. Africa is still fighting for its true independence. There's a classic title for a book written by Oginga Odinga in the 1960s. And the title was Not Yet Uhuru. Uhuru is the Swahili word for independence. Africa is not yet Uhuru.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.